Hello everybody and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I of course am just another heavy metal maniac, and today I am doing another video. So this video is going to be all about a few days ago I uploaded a video. It was a response video to the Thralls of Metal. It was about 10 bands whose debut album is still their best album. This video is going to be the opposite of that. It's going to be 10 bands whose debut is, in my opinion, their weakest album. So I got 10 bands here where I believe their debut is their worst album. Now, I will mention that I like most of the albums that are on this list. And just because I think it's this band's weakest album doesn't mean I think it's a bad album per se, although there's a couple on this list I'm really not big on, like, at all. But, yeah, without further ado, enough of my ramblings, let's just get into the video. Alright, so my first pick, I might catch a bit of flack for this first choice, but frankly, this band has a flawless discography anyway, and lots of people have different opinions on which is their best album. A lot of people cite their first album as their best album, and it's a great album, but in my opinion, it's their weakest album. My first choice is Death with their debut, Scream Bloody Gore. Now, this is a fantastic album. It is, without a doubt, one of the most important metal albums of all time ever made. When we can, sit here and debate back and forth about, what was the true first death metal album, was it Seven Churches, was it Scream Bloody Gore, whatever, but there's no denying the impact that Scream Bloody Gore had on, the metal scene. Very iconic album, very important album. Some people say it's Death's best album, but in my opinion, this is Death's weakest album, because to me, Death is just a band that got better and better and better as time went along type thing. And, all their albums are great. They have a damn near flawless discography. Their entire back catalog is damn near perfect. But usually if I have to pick a favorite Death album, usually Human is the one I go for, or Individual Thought Patterns, or even Leprosy. But yeah, Death, they just improved over time. The songwriting got better. It got tighter. It got heavier, honestly. Like, Leprosy was kind of heavier than Scream Bloody Gore, in my opinion. So just in my opinion, Scream Bloody Gore is Death's weakest album, but it's still a fantastic album. I still really, really enjoy it. I just think, again, Death has a pretty much flawless catalog, like I said, and you could pick any Death album as your favorite, and I'm not going to judge you for it. But, yeah, for me, their debut is just not their strongest work. That's my first choice, Death, Scream Bloody Gore. Alright, my second choice, now, most of the bands on this list are death metal bands. There's a couple that aren't, but most of these are death metal bands. So, my next choice is another death metal band, and it's Carcass. And in my opinion, their debut album, Reek of Putrefaction, is their weakest work. I'm not going to sit here and deny the impact of this album. It was a very important album when it comes to grindcore. It's pretty much like the first gore grind album by general consensus. Again, hugely influential album. It's my least favorite that they've ever made. It's, for one, the production on it, the mix is just total ass. Like, I get that's a thing with a lot of gore grind, is a very raw, extremely unpolished production, but I don't know, it doesn't make it enjoyable for me, and I don't know, to me, Reek of Putrefaction feels more like a novelty album as opposed to an actual thing you're, like, supposed to listen to type thing. It's, and I mean, come on, Carcass they just improved greatly as time went along. They improved on Symphony of the Sickness, which I'm again not a huge fan of. But like by the time you get to Necroticism, like holy shit, that album is an absolute banger. It's like one of the best death metal albums ever made, in my opinion. And Heartwork, which I think is a bit overrated, is a great album. Swansong is underrated as fuck. And their last two albums have been really, really killer. So yeah, again, just like Death, Carcass are just a band that, to me, got better and better as time went along, as they improved their musicianship, they got tighter, they got heavier, honestly, yeah, and also the mixes just got better, because, like I said, the production of Reek of Putrefaction, in my opinion, is total ass, and, yeah, it's not an album I'm going to return to very often. Again, Again, a hugely influential album to core grind and grindcore, but it's, you know, it's in my opinion their weakest album. Carcass, Reek of Putrefaction. All right, here is another British death metal band, British death metal legends, I should say. Easily in my top 5 favorite death metal bands. Period. I absolutely love this band, and it's Bolt Thrower. And in my opinion, their weakest album is their debut, In Battle There Is No Law. So Bolt Thrower before they became the Bolt Thrower that we all know and love, were more of a grindcore band. Granted, they were very riffy grindcore, but to me, their debut album, In Battle There Is No Law, it's you know, I am already not really into grindcore very much, admittedly. And again, it's riffy grindcore, but I mean, come on, you cannot convince me this album even closely compares to those once loyal, to Realm of Chaos, War Master, Fourth Crusade, you know, all those great albums that came out after this one. This album's always stood out as just kind of an oddity because, again, nothing else in their entire back catalog sounds like this album. And I know I'm probably going to catch flack for this one too. Like, I'm definitely going to catch flack for Scream Blood Gore and Reek of Putrefaction, but I'm probably also going to catch flack for this choice of Bolt Thrower because a lot of people do really love this album. There's some people who say this is Bolt Thrower's best album, which I think is insane, but, you know, everyone's entitled to their opinion, obviously. I don't know. I've tried to like this album. It just doesn't really do a whole lot for me. It's easily, in my opinion, their weakest album. Just, you know, again, they just greatly improved. Like, the improvement from In Battle There Is No Law to Realm of Chaos, just everything got tighter. It got heavier for sure. And also, this is easily this band's weakest vocal performance, in my opinion. Carl Willits, he's doing kind of more of a, I don't even know, like a punky shout, kind of. And, yeah, you know, it's his just iconic, deep, militaristic roar is not on this album, so that's my third pick, In Battle There Is No Law by Bolt Thrower. Alright, number 4 is a band that their later material I really enjoy. Like, I think this band's last few albums in particular have been just absolutely incredible. But to me, in their early stuff, leaves a little bit to be desired. So my next choice is Cattle Decapitation with their debut album, Human Jerky. Now, when I originally did my death metal debuts tier list, I mistakenly said To Serve Man was their debut album because I did not realize Human Jerky was actually considered a full length. I thought it was just an EP. But no, the band considers it a full length, so yeah, their debut album is Human Jerky. Anyways, off topic. Yeah, again, it's grindcore, it's like, it's gore grind, again, and this is them just kind of at their most raw, not their most primitive, frankly. Again, I'm just not really into grindcore, so this album really just does not do a blessed thing for me. And it's also just like an album that just goes by. It is aggressively short. I believe it's only 16 minutes long. And, you know, it just goes by as just like, okay, that's a song. Wait, that song's already over. Okay, no, that's a song. Wait, that song's already over too? You know, it's just grindcore. It's just, you know, and like, you know, I think like Humanure was a big improvement because they started to incorporate more death metal in that album. It became, you know, more death grind, and then they kept improving on like Karma, Blade Karma, Harvest Floor, etc. And like I said, their last albums, like their last few albums, have been absolutely killer in my opinion. Like, I love Death Atlas. I think that's one of the best metal albums of the 2010s. Like, I loved Terracite, Anthropocene Extinction, Monolith of Inhumanity. You know, fantastic albums in my opinion. So yeah, their first album, Human Jerky, just really does not do anything for me. I think it's easily their weakest album. Human Jerky and To Serve Man, in my opinion, are both kind of interchangeable, but Human Jerky is probably the weaker of the two. So yeah, that's my next pick, Cattle Decapitation, Human Jerky. Can't talk today. Alright, my next pick is, we're going to talk about some Swedish stuff here now. My next pick is Edge of Sanity, Nothing But Death Remains. Kind of one of the big gripes I have with this album is the production. The production on this album really kind of isn't that great. It's pretty muddy, and, you know, it's not the worst thing I've ever heard, but it just really isn't great at all. And also, again, just like with Death or Carcass, Edge of Sanity, they just got better and better as time went along. And looking back at this album, I don't think it's a terrible album or anything, but this album does not even closely compare, in my opinion, to Purgatory Afterglow or Crimson. You know, it's very primitive. It's not really any proggy flair is here on this album. You know, pretty much most things people like about Edge of Sanity really kind of aren't on Nothing But Death Remains. So, you know, it's... Again, it's not a terrible album. I think it's a decent album, but it's just... when it comes to Edge of Sanity, it's not an album I'm going to listen to very often, if really ever. Because, again, Edge of Sanity, they just have way better albums than this. So it just doesn't really do a whole lot for me. So that's my number 5 pick, Edge of Sanity, Nothing But Death Remains. Again, it's decent. If the production was better, I'd probably like it more, but, you know, what are you going to do? Alright, now this is the final death metal band on this list. We're going to talk about some melodic death metal here. Black Dahlia Murder, Unhallowed. Their debut, in my opinion, is their weakest album. A lot of people do love this album. Some people say this is his band's best album again, which I think is a little crazy, but whatever. Unhallowed, for one, the production, it's very, very raw. Like, I don't know, I like raw production, but I don't know, I just feel like they kind of got better production-wise on their other albums, but also they just got better songwriting-wise again. Because this album, to me, is kind of their most... I don't want to say generic, but it was definitely their least unique, because at this point, they kind of hadn't really found their own sound, it felt like, on this album. To me, this kind of sounds a lot more along the lines of just, like, you know, At the Gates worship type thing, like them, like Unhallowed kind of feels like their attempts to write their own Slaughter of the Soul in a lot of ways, and which a lot of bands were trying to do that at that time, obviously, because obviously Slaughter of the Soul, hugely influential album when it comes to melodic death metal. That bit, like, pretty, like them, like Slaughter of the Soul and Just a Race are the two albums that American melodic death metal bands would constantly be jerking off in the early 2000s, but yeah. Anyways, yeah, the drum work on here can also get pretty damn sloppy at points, but, there is still some really good songs in here, like Thy Horror Cosmic is probably one of my favorite Black Dahlia Murder songs. I really like that song, but, I don't know, to me, just, they have so many better albums than Unhallowed. Like, Miasma was a great improvement on Unhallowed, in my opinion. It's a strong contender for my favorite. And, you know, like Verminous and Deflorate, all these albums, right? They just got better, in my opinion. They were, you know, yeah, like, I don't know, I feel like I'm kind of just repeating myself. That's my number 6 pick, is the Black Dahlia Murder with Unhallowed. Again, I think it's a good album, but they just got way better albums. They got tighter as musicians and all. Alright, now that's all the death metal bands out of the way. Now let's talk about some non-death metal bands. Alright, so my next choice is a band I love. This is like one of the first metal bands I ever got into. I love this band to this day, but yeah, my next choice is Pantera with their debut, Metal Magic. I think this album is probably more famous for its atrocious album cover than the actual music itself, which, yeah, the album cover is fucking terrible. It is, I don't know who saw that and was like, yes, that's what we want to do. That looks good. That looks good. Let's have that as our album cover. What were they thinking? But yeah, also musically, this is definitely their weakest album. I don't think I'm going to catch much flack for saying that. I think by and large, this is considered Pantera's worst album. It's not hard to see why. For one, this sounds nothing like Cowboys from Hell or Vulgar Display of Power. This album is pretty much just them kind of playing. Like, I got to cut them some slack, because they were super young, like, when they made this album. Like, Dimebag was fucking 16, and he still manages to crank out some killer solos and shit, so yeah. I mean, obviously Dimebag was a hell of a guitar player. And, yeah, to me, Metal Magic is just them it's just them playing what these guys really liked at the time, and you can hear, they are proudly wearing all their influences, you know, on their sleeve, and you can hear stuff like, you know, there's a lot of Kiss worship, because obviously the Avett brothers were big fans of Kiss. There was a lot of Van Halen worship on this. Definitely a lot of like, I'd say even a bit of like Judas Priest, maybe even Iron Maiden at points, and you know, like this pretty much is just them kind of. I say it's kind of your fairly generic kind of early '80s hair metal, glam metal, heavy metal, kind of hard rock. Yeah, it's not a terrible album. I talked about it in my like ranking worst metal albums list, where I put it in the not that bad tier at the top because, truth be told, it's not a terrible album. It's got decent songs on it, but overall, this is not, you know, Pantera. They very much did not find anything close to their sound at this point in their career. And yeah, in my opinion, it's easily the weakest Pantera album. And Terry Glaze was not a great singer either. That's probably the worst thing about it. Other than the album cover is probably the vocals, Terry Glaze, and the lyrics are dumb as fuck too. But I don't know, that's to be expected with glam metal, I think. So is my next pick, Pantera with Metal Magic. All right, next up is another band I really love a lot. They're kind of like the pioneers of stoner doom. I've talked about them a couple times on this channel, I think. My next choice is Sleep with their debut, Volume 1. Yeah, now Sleep does have obviously a very short catalog. They only have 4 studio full-length albums. But out of all those 4, I do think their debut, Volume 1, is probably my least favorite, although that's not saying much because it's still a very good album. It's just, to me, this album is kind of again, an oddity in their catalog because this doesn't really sound a lot like anything like Holy Mountain or even Dope Smoker, really. It's kind of more of the ugly side of like stoner doom in a lot of ways. It's kind of heavier. The production isn't that great. Like, it's pretty thin. It's kind of sludgy, I guess you could say. It's like, again, it's just kind of heavier. It's kind of more ugly. It's less of the, you know, less of the trademarks of Sleep are on Volume 1. That's not to say it's a bad album. Again, to me, it's still a very enjoyable album. But compared to Holy Mountain, which is like one of the greatest metal albums ever made, and even Dope Smoker, which I know some people don't like that album because it's very long, but I don't know, I love Dope Smoker. It's an awesome album in my opinion, or song, whatever you want to call it. And The Sciences was a killer comeback album. Volume 1 to me, it stands out as just kind of an oddity, and it's not an album I return to super often. If I want sleep, I'll jam Holy Mountain or The Sciences or Dope Smoker, but it's still a decent album, so that's my next choice, Sleep, Volume 1. Alright, now my my second to last choice is Corrosion of Conformity with their 1984 debut album, I for an I. Now, not a lot of people like talk about this album, and it kind of isn't hard to see why, because this sounds nothing like the Corrosion of Conformity most people know and love. Corrosion of Conformity, before they became the Corrosion of Conformity everybody loves, they started off as a hardcore punk band. And this debut is very raw, just very kind of unrefined, very just kind of sloppy hardcore punk. And I'm just not really into hardcore punk, really. I've said that a few times on this channel. I just don't get into a lot of old school hardcore punk. So, I don't know, to me this album really just does not do a whole lot for me. And I know Corrosion of Conformity are also considered to be kind of one of the pioneers of, like, crossover, because, you know, their album Animosity was, like, one of the first crossover thrash albums, and, you know, they were considered to be one of the pioneers of crossover, along with, like, SOD, DRI, Suicidal Tendencies, that sort of thing. So, yeah, they were definitely influential during this time as well. But to me, I don't know, this album, for me, when Corrosion of Conformity slowed things down and kind of toned down the aggression, and they refined their sound, they made it heavier, and, you know, when Pepper, you know, joined the band, to me, that's when the really good Corrosion of Conformity era started, when, you know, those great harmonies, great riffs, great lyrics, great vocals. That's the Corrosion, like, albums like Blind, Deliverance, Wise Blood, you know, all those albums I love. You know, that's the Corrosion of Conformity stuff I really love. So yeah, the early stuff just really doesn't do much for me. I mean, it's still enjoyable in parts, but it just really isn't not like anything like Corrosion of Conformity would come later. And again, I love, like, their just later stuff. So yeah, in my opinion, Corrosion of Conformity, their weakest album is Eye for an Eye from 1984. Alright, now this final band, I did a discography ranking, I think a couple months ago, and I talked about how I think their debut album is their weakest album, and it's Crowbar with their debut, Obedience Through Suffering. Now, this was a very important album, definitely when it comes to sludge metal. This came out in '91, and this was a time when sludge metal was still very, very, very much in its infancy. You know, you had, like, Bullhead came out the same year, you had, like, I Hate God's debut that came out in 1990. You know, sludge metal at this point was still very much in its infancy. It really hadn't exploded as a scene yet. It really wouldn't take off until, I think 93, 94 was when it really kind of started to take off and become its own unique thing. So yeah, this is a definitely influential and important album. And it's got great songs on it, like A Breed Apart, the title track's good, Subversion. But the big thing that holds this album back for me is the production. Production-wise, this is Crowbar's worst sounding album in my opinion. The drums sound very, very, very odd. They're like, I don't know what the word would be. They're kind of, I don't know, they just sound really, really, really off. The bass tone is kind of garbage. I like Todd Strange's bass tone later, but I don't know, I think on Obedience for Suffering it kind of sucked. The guitars weren't quite there. They were very thin in the mix, and Kirk's vocals were definitely very different. They were kind of more clean. You know, they weren't as aggressive. They were very sullen, and I don't think the vocals were decent, but he hadn't found a sound yet. This isn't a terrible album. Again, there's some good songs on it, but this is just a band that very much just has not found their sound yet, and the improvement going from Obedience Through Suffering to the self-titled was, again, massive. Like, they really tightened things up. The musicianship got way better. I know I probably sound like a broken record because I'm saying a lot of the same things, but that's just my reason for why I think these bands' debut albums are their weakest, you know. And, yeah, again, they just got way, way better. They released my favorite album of all time later on, Sonic Excess, and a couple other of my favorite albums of all time in Crowbar's back catalog. So yeah, in my opinion, their debut, while decent, is definitely their weakest album. That's my final choice, Obedience Through Suffering from Crowbar. And, well, that about does it. I thank you all so much for watching this. If you made it to the end of this video, you're awesome, and I appreciate you. Leave a like if you enjoyed this video. Comment down below. What do you think about these albums? What do you think about do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? What do you think about this video? I want feedback. Let me know. And do consider subscribing, because I do have a lot more content coming your way. And, well, not much else to say. That about does it. Of course, I'm just another heavy metal maniac. I'll see you all sometime in the future. In the meantime, all of you take care and have a great day. So long.